In the middle of the Great Depression, a killer moved through the poorest parts of Cleveland. He left his victims in pieces along the tracks and ravines of Kingsbury Run. The newspapers called him the Mad Butcher. Eliot Ness himself tried to stop him. He failed. Kingsbury Run began as a natural watershed draining the eastern slopes of Cleveland down into the Cuyahoga River. By the mid-1930s, this deep, rugged ravine corridor was carved up by industrial expansion and the tracks of the Cleveland and Mahoning Valley Railroad, which had sliced through the valley since 1857. Alongside coal yards and early oil refining plants, the steep, wooded slopes became home to a sprawling Hooverville shantytown. Here, thousands of displaced workers and transient families built a makeshift community from cardboard, scrap timber, and salvaged sheet metal. They lived without municipal water, electricity, or sanitation, hidden away in a zone the city largely ignored. The Great Depression had stripped these residents of their jobs, their homes, and their security. Many drifted from other Midwestern industrial centers, arriving without family contacts, dental records, or formal identification. In the dark corners of the ravine, a fragile, informal society took root amidst the soot and the shadows of the rail yards. It was an environment of extreme vulnerability, where the destitute could vanish from official records long before they ever crossed paths with a killer. This neglected stretch of earth served as a refuge for those whom the modern economic collapse had left behind. On September 5, 1934, a beachcomber on the Euclid Beach shoreline of Lake Erie, just east of Bratenahl, discovered a chemically treated female torso. The skin had been preserved with chloride of lime to resist decay. Without a head, limbs, or distinguishing marks, investigators could not identify her, and she became known as the Lady of the Lake. This discovery was the first hint of a methodical killer operating in the area. On September 23, 1935, the violence moved directly into the floor of Kingsbury Run. Two workers clearing a creek bed in the ravine found two decapitated, dismembered male bodies. Using fingerprint analysis, police identified one as Edward Andrassy, a 29-year-old hospital orderly. The second victim, prepared in a similar fashion, remained entirely anonymous. A terrifying pattern was taking shape. The killer was systematically targeting those on the absolute margins of Depression-era Cleveland. In an era without centralized databases, transient residents had no dental records, no fingerprints on file, and no family nearby to report them missing. From the very beginning, investigators faced a wall of anonymity, struggling to identify bodies that had been stripped of their names long before they were stripped of their lives. The news of the mutilated bodies quickly breached the physical walls of Kingsbury Run, flooding the streets of Cleveland with a cold, pervasive panic. In late 1935, the Cleveland Press and the Plain Dealer plastered graphic photographs of dismembered remains onto front pages. Stark, black and white headlines like "Two dismembered bodies found in Kingsbury Run" and "Andrassy identified in grisly find" became a daily fixture at newsstands. Political cartoons featured a towering, faceless butcher casting a long shadow over a map of the city's ravine, transforming a localized horror into an omnipresent urban threat. As the body count rose without names, the fear shifted from the margins of society into the living rooms of middle-class Cleveland. Every vacant lot, dark alleyway, and railroad track suddenly felt unsafe. The city's most vulnerable residents, transients, vagrants, and the working poor were now viewed with both pity and intense suspicion, destabilizing the fragile social order of the streets. Public pressure mounted. By December 1935, city council minutes recorded desperate demands from community leaders for a sweep of the shantytowns and swift justice for the victims. The murders were more than a police investigation. They had become a severe political liability and a source of profound municipal embarrassment. With the upcoming Great Lakes Exposition scheduled to bring millions of tourists to the lakefront, city administrators realized that the unchecked violence threatened Cleveland's entire economic recovery. The pressure on City Hall was reaching a boiling point. On December 11, 1935, Mayor Harold Burton appointed Eliot Ness as Cleveland's public safety director. Ness, famous for dismantling Al Capone's network in Chicago, took charge of a police department notorious for corruption. He promised reform, but the faceless killer in the ravine challenged his reputation at every turn. As the bodies accumulated, the public demanded results that traditional policing could not deliver. Before dawn on August 18, 1938, Ness launched a desperate, scorched earth campaign. Accompanied by police officers and firefighters, he led a massive raid directly into the heart of the Kingsbury Run shantytowns. Authorities rounded up the inhabitants, evicting roughly 300 impoverished squatters with virtually no warning. Under Ness's direct orders, crews used fire trucks to set nearly 100 makeshift shacks ablaze. Within hours, the sprawling Hooverville was reduced to ash. Ness claimed the aggressive purge was necessary to deny the killer a hiding place and force the transient population into formal shelters. The sheer destruction triggered immediate outrage. While some praised the sweep, critics condemned the operation as a cruel act that targeted the city's most vulnerable. The Cleveland press labeled the raid an abuse of municipal authority, warning that the flames had likely consumed vital forensic evidence. In the aftermath, city council members held tense hearings. Alderman John Miller openly criticized the safety director, arguing that the raid sacrificed justice for a public relations stunt. Though the physical destruction of the shantytowns coincided with the end of the murders, no suspect was ever convicted. The desperate maneuver failed to solve the mystery, leaving a permanent shadow over Ness's career and cementing the case as a lasting failure in an otherwise legendary life. Investigators focused their attention on a suspect known in police files as Dr. X, later identified as Dr. Francis E. Sweeney. A World War I veteran, Sweeney had performed battlefield amputations, possessing the precise surgical skill the coroner identified on the victims. Eliot Ness personally oversaw a secret, multi-day interrogation of the doctor in a hotel room, even administering early polygraph tests. Yet, the questioning yielded no confession, and searches turned up no physical evidence. Because of his family connections, his cousin was a prominent local congressman, and a total lack of admissible forensic proof, the county prosecutor never filed charges. Sweeney voluntarily entered a veterans' hospital in the early 1950s, where he was later diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. This institutionalization occurred years after the killing stopped, leaving his potential guilt a matter of unresolved speculation. Other leads proved equally hollow. Police arrested a bricklayer named Frank Dolezal in 1939 for the murder of Florence Polillo, but Dolezal died in his cell before reaching trial, his confession widely considered coerced. Every promising path led back to the same silent, frustrating dead end. The files are gone. During a 1970s archive consolidation, the original Cleveland police case dossiers, detective notebooks, and coroner's logs vanished, leaving behind only fragmented summaries. Modern investigators do not inherit a trail to follow. They inherit a void. Without physical evidence or complete documentation, the Kingsbury Run murders remain officially open, a series of killings where no suspect was ever indicted. Yet the true cost of this failure lies in the potter's field. Of the 12 documented victims, only Edward Andrassy, Florence Polillo, and Rose Wallace were ever identified. The others were buried without names, stripped of their identities by poverty and violence, leaving Cleveland with a legacy defined by what was lost rather than what was solved. 12 victims murdered, a killer vanished, and a city left with only ghosts. Who do you believe escaped justice? This has been Shadow Files, Forgotten Evidence. Subscribe for more untold histories.